In this video, we're going to talk about the relationship between post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, and substance use disorder. I want to start by saying that we will not be walking through all the signs and symptoms or the diagnosis of substance use disorder, but you can find that information on the video resource list. We're going to focus more on why the two have such a relationship, because you will find that many people medicate themselves with drugs and alcohol when they do have post-traumatic stress disorder. So I'm going to start with talking about something called reenactment. And many survivors go through this process of reenactment of the original trauma. Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote the book The Body Keeps Score and Traumatic Stress, he's been studying trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder for about 30 years. And he talks about people being addicted to trauma, that they go back and they reenact their trauma over and over again. It's almost like a compulsion. And what happens when people do that is sometimes they get stuck in that repetitive behavior over and over again. So it's worth mentioning that this is not unusual. Many people do this, and their reenactments can be both literal or symbolic. Literal would be if I grow up in a home with domestic violence, I might, as an adult, become a victim or the person that harms in a domestic violence relationship. But most of the time, it is symbolic. And it's usually involving behaviors that are humiliating, self-defeating, dangerous, risky. For the people that are on the outside, the providers, the law enforcement, the loved ones, they may watch this person and they probably aren't using the term reenacting behaviors. They're probably looking at that person and thinking, why would you do these things that hurt you so much? But there's connections to the trauma that oftentimes get missed. And what also gets missed is that there's a payoff in those behaviors. Behaviors like cutting yourself, suicidal ideation, harming other people, they can have a payoff on to express yourself, to tell your story, to give the message of just how much pain you are in. It can also be a form of control with eating disordered behaviors, which we often see with people that have trauma histories, is they're controlling what goes into their body and what goes out of their body. Same way with cutting, is they're controlling that pain. So there's a sense of control there. So there's always a payoff. And one of the behaviors that is often listed in reenacting behaviors is substance use disorder. Substances, it's kind of bidirectional. Substances, drugs, and alcohol can make us more vulnerable for additional traumas, traumatic events, and traumatic events can make us more vulnerable for substance use. So we want to keep that in mind, because we'll see people that have a trauma history, and as they get older, there is more and more and more trauma in their life, and there's more and more self-defeating behaviors. And instead of looking at this person and saying, why do they keep doing these crazy things? We don't want to say why the addiction or why the crazy things. We want to say why the pain. Because it's a response to trauma and it's a response to pain. So we just need to change the question. So let's talk just for a moment about how substances help with trauma. So we all have chemicals and hormones that they're called the happiness chemicals. So you may have heard of some of these: oxytocin, which is a hormone that helps us bond with our children as parents. We have endorphins, which people receive when they do lots of exercise and they get kind of an instant boost of energy. We have serotonin, which is a mood stabilizer. And then we have dopamine. And dopamine is what really plays into this relationship between substance use disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. Dopamine is our reward chemical. And it's been a part of our brains since the beginning of evolution. And the reason it was put there is to make sure that we did certain things that it would allow us to exist. So we get surges of dopamine for eating things. And it's there to make sure that we continue to eat and that we continue to sleep and that we procreate. So it's there for a reason. And we still have dopamine today. And there's lots of different ways to get it. And so I may eat a slice of chocolate cake and my dopamine's going to spike a little bit. And then it'll go back down. And it'll go back down to what we call homeostasis. And then maybe something else happens and I get another spike, I go back down to homeostasis. Now, if we look at drugs like nicotine, alcohol, heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, they also have the capabilities to surge our dopamine. But the surges are very high. And they are not, you are not capable of getting that type of surge in any other way, in a natural way, like getting a hug from someone. So remember when I talked about chocolate cake, you're gonna have like this surge and you go back to homeostasis, right? If it's methamphetamine, you're gonna have a surge up here. And then you're gonna come down, but you're going to go below homeostasis. And so you're living in kind of you're deprived. So when you have the urge to use again, it is very, very strong. It's kind of like when you're starving and how great a cheeseburger tastes. It always tastes better if you're really, really hungry, right? It's the same way with drugs. And what happens over time is you create this hierarchy in your brain. It's called the hierarchy of survival. And it starts when you're very young. And in a healthy brain, you're creating a hierarchy where food and sleep and these other things are at the top because you want to make sure you're doing those all the time in order to stay alive, right? Well, when you introduce these other chemicals, like alcohol, nicotine, heroin, the brain is tricked in a way thinking because the spike in dopamine is so high that it should be prioritized over sleeping and eating, drinking water, all of those things. And what happens over time is people actually feel as if they will die if they do not use. And that is promoted even more, that idea, that belief, that feeling, when you have post-traumatic stress disorder. Because you're already dealing with things like depression and anxiety. And then if you're depleted in your dopamine, it's kind of like a perfect storm. And you're set up in a way where you feel like you have to prioritize using drugs and alcohol, nicotine, in order to continue to live. And I think it's important to understand that because oftentimes we might have loved ones and again, service providers who will say you just need to quit. You need to quit using drugs. You need to quit drinking. And certainly that is good advice, but it does not address the complexity. And it doesn't address the pain. It doesn't address why that person has started using in the first place. And the architecture in your brain is even more set when you start doing these things before your brain's fully developed. So we know that our brain does not fully develop until we're 25 years old. So in my case, I started drinking when I was 11. So that truly impacted the development and architecture of my brain to kind of set me up to prioritize being able to use. And it truly did. I did truly believe that I would die if I stopped drinking. So the reason I'm sharing this is because I think it's important to understand how powerful it can be when survivors decide that they want to let go of some of these behaviors, these reenactment behaviors, whether it's cutting or eating disordered behavior or suicidal thoughts or substance use, that both have to be addressed, that you have to address the pain if you're going to address the dependency, and that you have to understand that unlike other behavioral health disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms increase when you're abstinent, not decrease. And so if you have someone that has been medicating themselves with drugs and alcohol for 20, 30 years, and then they abstain, they are going to have symptoms of PTSD. And they are going to have them in a way that feels tremendously overwhelming because they don't have the practice of feeling and sitting with those feelings. And so what you might see is relapse, and not just once or twice, but relapse over and over because of the pain. That the pain is so intense, and you know that all you have to do is go to a bar or call your dealer, and the pain will go away. So why wouldn't you? It's not hard to understand why people are going to choose dopamine over pain and suffering. So in order to help people through that process, we have to address the pain. We have to give them hope. They have to have moments where they are able to learn and to find coping skills and strategies, where they have opportunities to walk through and process their grief and trauma with a professional or with a peer support specialist. And once they have that and they're able to maybe find some small bits of time to build some stability and abstinence, they'll be able to connect with life, even just a little bit, that gives them hope. Because what the goal is that you create a life worth staying sober for. And that can be reconnecting with your children that maybe you lost. Maybe it is being able to go back to school. Maybe it's being able just to laugh. Maybe you get that job that you've been trying to get when you didn't think that you were capable of doing it. So once you start creating that life that's worth being sober for, that will provide people the incentive to continue on that journey.